Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Tech Talk about Nuxt.js. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Rickard Virta. I work here at the B3 Innovation since June, and I have come across this framework while working with one of our clients. And let's get into it. We have quite a lot to go through. It's going to be a pretty technical presentation. We're going to look at a demo application and the code that powers it. So let's start off. Do we have the graphics? Yes. Okay, so what is Nuxt.js? It is an open source front-end framework built on top of Vue.js. It was released in October 2016. It has a very active community. You get a lot of support from the makers and all the other community members who contribute to the framework. So it's a really active and modern feel about the community and the framework. It's special because the code base bundles into a single page application and a Node.js server, which enables both client-side rendering and server-side rendering and more. It can also generate static assets to deploy on a CDN, and we'll look into what this means a little bit later. So yes, it differentiates from another front-end framework like Vue in the sense that Vue only has single-page applications, client-side rendering. So since I've built this demo application, and we're going to start off with going through some of the Vue basics, because I don't assume that everyone knows Vue here today. So we'll start by looking at that. And then we'll sort of progress towards what is Nuxt specific. And I'll try to explain as we go what is Vue and what is Nuxt. So let's start off with the Nuxt Vue.js basics. So in Vue.js, in a front-end framework, we make different components. Components like buttons and like this little Luke Skywalker card here. That's a component, and we can reuse it in different parts of our application. That's one of the main things about the front-end frameworks such as Vue and React. In these frameworks, I said here on the previous slide that is built on top of Vue.js. In this framework, we get help with the components. We get some quality of life features, if you like. Components used on a page or component, you can use one component inside of another. You have to import them and register them, which is not complex at all, but it just adds up to a lot of boilerplate code. So we get rid of all that, and we'll see that in the code a little bit later. Also, in Vue, every page has to be mapped to a URL manually, which is not super complex, but if it's not complex, we can get a computer or compiler to do it for us. So that's good. We can focus on the business needs. In Vue.js, like I said, all the HTML is rendered in the client browser. And this is really nice, but we'll see some advantages of server-side rendering a little bit later in the application, in the presentation. Also, when we're using front-end frameworks like this, we have data that we want to display, and like this Luke Skywalker here. This is an example of local data. We sometimes a component, sometimes a different page, they need to use the same data. So we use a state manager plugin. And in Vue.js, this one has to be set up and configured manually. It's not very complex, but Nuxt will do it for us. So we'll see that. And so here is, like I said, an example of a component. It has some graphics logic, and it has some data that we present. And then we have another component here, a button, and we can click it. Right now it says hello world, and then we click it and it says goodbye world. So I just thought we'd take a little bit, we'll take a look at the code for this screen. And just to show you guys what Vue looks like. So this is all Vue, this is all possible in Vue. So traditionally, when making websites, we have an HTML document, a CSS document, and a script document, and they sort of talk together to make the website live. In Vue, it's structured like this, and this is similar in React. We have a template section, which holds our markup. And we can use dynamic expressions here. So this is the card, the V card here. This is the card with Luke Skywalker, and this is gonna be the person's name, the person's height, the person's URL. So this is the markup section. We can do a lot of dynamic stuff here in Vue and React. Moving on to the script section. Yes, this one. We have my button here. This is a component that we have created. And to use it, to use it in our markup, we need to import it on line 29. Then we have to register it on line 33. And this is not very cumbersome right now, but imagine in a production application, it's gonna look something like this, and obviously like this. So it's pretty nice to not have to look at all that repetitive code all the time. There's one caveat here. In testing environments, it's not automatically imported, so you have to deal with that in your testing environment. You'd have to import it. So the script section also has the local data. So this is the message that we showed, and this is the person. Right now it says null because we're down here, we're fetching a person from the Star Wars API. We also, so that's our local data. It's only accessible in this component. The component also has methods. This one has one method, handle click, and it just manipulates the data, changes it into goodbye world. And then we have lifecycle hooks in Vue. There's mounted, unmounted, before mount, and there's an array of lifecycle hooks. This hook on mounted, it will fetch information from the Star Wars API, and it will open the packet, and it will create a found persons object, which looks like this, and then we will assign it to the local data. So that's why we didn't just get null, we actually got Luke. Luke is number 1. We also have a script section in our Vue components, and you can define classes here and use them in your markup. So this is all Vue. So that's all good. Let's move on to the next bit, components demo. In Nuxt, like I said, Nuxt will scan the components directory for any .vue files and automatically import them into all .vue files. So you don't have to import, you don't have to register. To scan other directories, such as components/webshop, additional configuration is required in the Nuxt config.js. That's a config file, obviously, that we'll take a look at a little bit later. So these are examples of components in case you're not used to front-end development. So this whole black box is one component that can have some logic here and has some cool effects. There can be icons, and there can be a little bit more complex components like this weather component. We can do stuff here. I didn't hook up any logic to it now, so it just looks cool. So what does that look like? It looks like components demo. It looks like this. In Vue, you can also, if you're not using the script section or the style section, you can just leave those out. So as we can see here, demo component is the first one. Nuxt logo was the logo that we saw, and this is the weather component. So this makes for really nice developer experience. They are all inside this components folder here, as you can see. Next up is the pages demo. Like I said, Nuxt will automatically look inside the pages folder and map routes to any .vue file. So some examples, /pages/contacts.vue will be accessible through /contacts. Pages demo index will be accessible through /pages demo. And this is just to show you how you can make a longer path if you like. /pages demo /about will be /pages demo /about. We can also use dynamic routes using an underscore. So pages demo /characters /_ID will be accessible through pages demo characters /any ID. And we can see that over here. We have a link to pages demo characters 1. And if we click it, we will get Luke Skywalker. If we go for number 2, we will get C3PO. And worth mentioning here is about the server versus client-side rendering. If I hit enter now in the URL field, we'll make an initial request to the node server that's backing up this application. And the initial render will be made on the server. We won't see, if we take a look at the networks tab, we won't see the request to the Star Wars API. However, if we go to here and we access the URL from here, we are using client-side rendering. So it's my browser that is fetching the information about Luke Skywalker. So that's pretty cool, but there are cooler things to come. I'll show you the store demo as well, just to explain a little bit about how state management works. The store is where we keep our global application state that we want to access from many different components. Say we wanted to fetch Luke Skywalker once, and we will want to show him on the pages demo and on the components demo, we can keep Luke Skywalker in our store. We have a store variable today, right now here, called interest rate. It has the value of 10. We can increase the interest rate to 12. And now we see it. And I'll show you how this works as well. This is really cool. This is one of the main advantages I think that Vue has over React. The state manager is much easier to understand. So let's take a look at that. Let's see, pages, store demo, and we'll also take a look at the actual store. We'll keep that on the right-hand side. So store demo is the page that we're on, and we have a computed property here, and this is a reactive property. It's a function that returns a property, and we can access the store variable in our store state interest rate variable, and then in the markup we can render interest rate like so. It's in here. There we go. On line 7, we can access that right there. And we have a button, and the @click hook is bound to this function, handle click. So what do? We read from the input. My input is bound to this data variable is bound to the input field. And whenever we type, we're gonna update this value here. As we click the button, we read the value, and then we dispatch an action to the store. And the store is on the right-hand side. So the variables are kept up here. We have an auth user variable. We'll take a look at that later. We have an interest rate variable. It starts off with the value 10. And then so this one here on line 24 on the left side corresponds to line 3 on the right-hand side. Then we have the actions. We have some actions that we're gonna take a look at later. Don't mind these now. We'll take a look at this one for now, because we're dispatching new interest rate, and then we're passing on the arg. I'm gonna close this one. We're dispatching new interest rate, and we're passing on the arg. And what it does is that it just to do a bit of logic here, just to show you that you can do a bit of logic in here. We're making sure that this is really a number. I could have typed in a letter, and we don't want letters as interest rate. You can, of course, use TypeScript with Nuxt if you want to, but I decided to keep it simple for now. If it's okay, we'll go ahead and commit a mutation called set interest rate, and we'll send the parsed value now that we're sure that it's an integer. The set interest rate mutation is defined up here, and we're basically saying state.interest rate equals new rate. So whenever this updates, this function is gonna run again, and we'll get updated values in our markup. We'll trigger a re-render. So in Vue, you would have to sort of set this up manually. It's not very complex, it's not very hard, but you'd have to do it. But now in Nuxt, if you want to use the store plugin, all you have to do is in the store folder, create an index.js file. And that's all there is to it. Just to make it clear, this code here, we could use this in any component. We could use this dispatch call here. We could use that in any component. So that's why this is really powerful. Makes it easy to build larger applications. So that's the store demo. We'll just try that again, and we can see that the interest rate is now value 3. So we've seen that the folder structure actually matters in Vue. In case you may have noticed that, and that's because Nuxt is configured to use a specific directory structure. These are the folders that will get created for you when you use the Nuxt CLI tool to initialize your project. And we'll talk a little bit about everyone. Build holds the bundled files, such as the single page application and the node server. Assets will hold static assets like CSS and pictures if you want to have small icons and stuff. Components, we've looked at that. Any Vue file in here will be imported into any other Vue file. Content is for, it sort of replaces the need for content services like Contentful. I haven't used this one, but it looks pretty interesting. Dist holds statically generated assets such as HTML and JavaScript. If you like, you notice that the _ID Vue file that's just one file, and it's dynamic, so it can display different data. But if you choose to not generate, like I said here, you can bundle into SPA and node server, or you can bundle into static assets. You would get one HTML file for Luke, one for C3PO, and they will all end up here. And then you can deploy those to a content delivery network, making for really quick websites. The layouts folder is interesting as well. It's just what it sounds like. It's the layout of the page. If you've noticed, the pages that we've seen so far in the code doesn't include any markup regarding this header or the sidebar. It's because those are a part of the layout. So the layout looks sort of, it looks like this. Let me close this off, and we'll go for layouts default. This is the layout file here. This is our default layout. So we have the V app. I'm using Vuetify here because I didn't want to spend too much time writing my own CSS. But we have the navigation drawer here, and we have the app bar. The app bar is the one that you see on the top, and the navigation drawer is the one that slides in from the side. Everything here is part of the layout, except for this. This is the Nuxt element, and this is just the same as the Vue router in Vue.js. It basically renders the page that we're currently on. And we have a footer here as well. And we have some different layouts. We have an error layout. We have a mobile layout. So this you can use the layouts to you can check for which device the user is currently on, and then you can choose which layout to use. And if you want to specify a layout, well, if you don't specify, obviously you're going to use the default layout. If you want to specify, you can do that in the Vue file. So that's where the layouts are. The middlewares it's a little bit more advanced topic. It's code that runs in between rendering. So whenever you navigate, you can run a piece of code. And whenever there's also server middleware, which is a little bit different, but it's also a type of middleware. We'll take a look at that later. We'll take a deep dive into this folder a little bit later. Modules are what they sound like. You have the possibility in Nuxt to create modules that allows you to reuse code. We'll take a look at the website later on and see the modules that they've created. Say you want to have a module that handles JSON Web Tokens and keeps them in the local storage of the web browser, and you want to make sure that it's gets sent along as a cookie with every request or whatever you want to do. Say, obviously, my implementation of this is going to be similar to yours, or it could be anyways. So the community has created a repository for modules, which is super nice. And we can use that to look through and see if there's anything that we need. So that's modules. It's one type of module. You can also create modules in your application, which allows you to just destructure your application into a more modular design. The pages folder, we've already talked about that. All the Vue files will get their own route automatically. Then we have the plugins folder. Plugins are a really cool feature. It allows us to inject global variables like the $store variables that we've seen that we use to dispatch the actions and access the variables from the state. That's a global variable. We can create our own global variables. We could do that with Vue as well, but in Nuxt, I think the procedure is very straightforward. We have a static folder and a store folder. The store folder we've looked at, and the static folder holds more static assets. It's not very interesting at this point. So let's have a quick look at the layouts. We'll move on to the layouts demo. Like I said, it lets you specify the top level layout of your GUI. A layout is a special page that mounts the current page along with other elements. For instance, the white box with rounded border that you currently see is a page. The rest of all the rest is part of the layout. A page can decide which layout to use and can do so dynamically. Now I'm using a module now because I didn't want to write the code for determining the device myself. So I just went to the community repository and looked for a module that helps me determine the device. So right now the device is desktop. And let's take a look at how we can decide which layout to use dynamically. And we do that by looking at the layouts demo. So we have the markup, and we can see here this the module injected a global variable as well. There's you can mix and match with these different functionalities of the framework to build whatever suits your needs. So the plugin also injected this global variable for me, so I can check if device is desktop, we will render this div. If device is tablet, we'll render this div, etc. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can look for here. You can look for the operative system and orientation and stuff like that. But right now we're in desktop. So the layout, so this is the script tag that we've seen. We could do this just to make it clear to you that it's the same. We could do this, return var, my var. It's just a part of the script tag. So the layout requires a string value to specify, and of course it maps to the file name in the layouts folder. So we'll check here. The context object is something that we'll talk about. The context object holds information about the whole application. We get references to all the different parts of the application, such as the store. We'll take another look at that later. If I assign a function to this the layout variable, Nuxt will call that function, calling it with the context object, the Nuxt context object. So we can check in the Nuxt context object if $device, our global variable, is mobile. If so, return the string mobile or return the string default. So I could, if you were to enter this, if you were to log into this website with your cell phone, you would have a different set of rules. I could show you that, but I think you can just trust me on this. Let's have a look at the different layouts. I'll just say this. The layouts are here. So the default layout, like I said, it has the navigation drawer, it has the up bar, it has a main section which renders the div, and then it has the router view. It also has a footer, and I couldn't come up with a good idea because the modern CSS frameworks today are so good at making applications responsive as it is. So in my example, the difference between the mobile layout and the default layout is that the mobile layout doesn't have a footer. Obviously, you can come up with some better ideas yourself if you want to. I think it's an interesting approach. I think it's interesting to see if you can use the layouts to create the responsivity instead of having all these dynamic pages that are like always changing depending on the viewport and stuff. It's a little bit annoying. I'll try to move that to the side. And let's get back to it. So that's layouts. Pretty interesting. Next topic is the plugins. And now we're really getting to some of the more interesting parts of the framework. Plugins are used to inject global variables. They can do other stuff as well, but a common use case is to inject global variables. Oh, thanks. Successful, good. Sometimes I have to restart the computer. Plugins are used to inject global variables. they can be used to provide abstract interfaces to third-party libraries. And this is really good. And like you saw before, I was using the fetch API in the Vue Basics page, I think. I was using the fetch API to get the first character, Luke. And say we want to switch from fetch to Axios or HTTP. If we show our Vue components that we're using fetch, we'd obviously have to change that all over the application. It would be a bit of a headache. Plus, we'd have to change all of our tests. So we can provide an abstract interface to third-party libraries. If you want to consider Axios and fetch third-party, that's up to you. So how do we do this? We create a plugin in the plugins folder. And we register our plugin in the Nuxt config. Then we access our plugin using the injected keys. And I have on the right-hand side made a little demo. There are, just to show you that there are client-side plugins, server-side plugins, and global plugins that are available on both sides. So let's take a quick look at this. You can see now we navigated to this page from another page. So this is only client-side rendering. So we don't have access to any server-side variable right now. These are plugins which injects variables that just points to strings. This variable points to a string with the value of client message, and this one global message, and this one these two will have other messages. So if we refresh the page now, if I hit enter, we're gonna make another initial request to the server, and we'll see server-side rendering. The first page is going to take place on the server. Then the Vue application is going to take over, and we'll do client-side rendering from here on. So if we look here at the server message real quick, I'll do this a few times. Boop. Do you see that? Server message. And then we go back here. But now the server message is kept here because we're using one of the data fetching methods that Nuxt provides for us. We have a method called async data, and you could see this as a life cycle hook in a sense. It's used to fetch data. So if I make a request to the server, the async data hook is going to be called on the server, so it will fetch any data for us. That we could see that in the pages demo when I was typing /1 for Luke. It was the same method that was in action. So that's pretty sweet. We have different plugins, but that's a silly example, to be honest. It's much cooler to provide abstract interfaces to third-party libraries. Let's have a look at this. We can call functions. These variables doesn't have to be strings, of course. They can be functions and objects and whatever. So let's see if we can use when we're hitting number 1 here and hitting fetch, we're going to call a function that is injected by a plugin. So we, or the Vue component, the page, doesn't know which API is being used to actually fetch the data. It doesn't even know that it's a fetch. It just knows that it will provide an ID, and then we will get some data back. So number 1 is Luke Skywalker. Number 2 is C3PO. I know all these by heart now because I've done this a million times. Let's go for number 11. It's one of my favorite characters. No, wrong. Anyways, so we have some data here. So let's just take a look at this. I'm clearing the data. We'll take a look at this flow. What does it look like? What does a plugin look like in the code? So the plugins folder, that's what I said first. We can have a quick look at these. This is a very simple simple form of a plugin. It's the most basic form, I would say. So the plugin is a function. It gets called, the Nuxt framework is going to call it with the Nuxt context again. We're going to see what we can access in this other file in a minute, but we get past Nuxt calls it with the Nuxt context. It also calls it with an inject function, and we use that. We create some variable or constant named variable, dodgy. Then we use the inject function. First argument will be the name of the global variable, and then we pass the thing that we wanna, the variable that we want to inject. And we can have a quick look at this on the pages demo. No, sorry, the plugins demo page. This is how we're reaching out to them. Actually, let's just take a look at the client. So the client plugin, it's available through a variable called client variable. I could have typed $sign client variable here if I wanted to, but I didn't for some reason. Instead, we have a computed property called get client variable. I could have just typed this into the markup if I wanted to, but I did this approach instead. Many different ways that all lead to Rome. So that's pretty cool. We'll take another look at that, but first we'll look at the more interesting plugin. As you can see, we have the client plugin, the fetch plugin, the global plugin, and the server plugin. When we register these plugins in the Nuxt config, we get to decide if it's client, server, or global. The fetch plugin, if I remember correctly, I made it global, and this is just to show you what do we get access to from the context object. So we use object destructuring here. All of these keys are available on the context object, so we can get access to the store. We can, so if I wanted to, this response, I could have said something like store.commit, and maybe we had a mutation called set person, and then we could have passed person. This would have been totally doable. But right now I'm just returning it instead on line 26, and we'll use it locally in the Vue component. That's fine too. So we have these different keys: route, parameters, query, environment. Are we in dev or production or test environments? We can redirect. This is a function for redirecting. This is a function for redirecting to the error page. This is a reference to the Nuxt config. We can read, maybe we specify some variables in the Nuxt config, and we can get access to those. And this Axios key here on line 14 is it's an Axios module. So the Nuxt community has made an Axios module for like simplifying the use of Axios and adding some functionality to Axios that relates to Nuxt. So the fetch. So in the plugin, we're defining a function called doFetch, and we take an ID, and we use the fetch API. And this is the beauty of it. See, if we wanted to change here, maybe we want to use this Axios instance because it's so good in working with Nuxt. We could change that here. And in the plugins demo, we have a handle click function. And I made some stuff here just to make it look cool in the interface. But what's really interesting is this part here. Well, we read the argument from the input field, then we await, and we call the $fetch data, that is this variable. And what is it? In fact, it's the doFetch function. And now we can get a person without knowing in detail how we get it, which is very nice. And then, of course, we add the person to the person's array, and then we render the person's array. That's why we got one card for each of the characters. So that's plugins, I think. Let me see if there's anything else that I want to show you. I think that's about it. There's many more things. You can do really cool things with plugins. So let's move on to middleware. And now it gets a little bit more complicated again. Let's see. I'm having problems with my... What's going on here? Layouts demo. Middleware demo. And now we're using in Vue, what you do if you want to guard routes from unauthorized access, you configure that in the Vue router, and you say something like, for the router, before every route transition, check in the store and see if we have an authorized user. If so, let the user proceed. Otherwise, redirect to this sort of page. And what I've done here is I've created, of course, a page, not a plugin, a page called middleware's demo. And this, like with layouts, you don't have to specify anything, but here I'm specifying that for this route, we want to use the middleware auth route guard. This could be an array as well. But this means that only this page is guarded. So we didn't have to use this middleware. We didn't use this middleware for any of the other pages. So let's just go ahead and log in so that we can read this markup in a more sensible way. To log in, we'll have to hit this one, and we'll just type in demo, and demo is my credentials, and then we log in. So now we can see that we're logged in because this button says log out. In the header, I'm accessing the auth user variable in the store. If it's populated, we say that we're logged in, so we render the logout button. If we're not, question. What is the benefit in using Axios versus Fetch? That's a good question. Fetch has it has a nicer API for us users. I can just show you a little bit about what it looks like. In Fetch, even if you're making a GET request or a POST request or a PUT request or whatever, the method that you're calling is always named Fetch. And then you send an options object specifying which HTTP method that you really want to use. In Axios, you create an Axios instance, and then you say instance variable dot get or dot post. So it's a little bit nicer for us developers. Plus, Axios also comes with a little bit more of security features out of the box. I haven't looked into it super much, but you can search for Axios versus Fetch, and you will see tables, and you will see that Axios has more features checked in all the cells. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And there's this other library called HTTP, which I often see in tutorials and stuff. I haven't tried it, but it seems cool. I want to try it someday. So where were we? Now that we're logged in, we get to access the middleware's page. Sorry, I meant to show you this. Register your plugin in the Nuxt config. I'll just show you that real quick as well, because it sort of goes hand in hand. This is the Nuxt config, and here we have our plugins. So the fetch plugin is this is global. We didn't specify a mode, so it's global. For this client plugin, it says the mode is client and the mode is server for this one, and this one is global again. I'm wondering a little bit, why do I have to specify this here? Why can't the Nuxt library just look inside the plugins folder like it does with the components and pages? I don't know, to be honest. That's just how it works today. Maybe they'll do it a little bit later. I've read that when people ask questions like this, they say, oh, can you make it so that the layout key in the component can take a function that gets past the context? I've seen that, like the discussions on the Nuxt community boards, and the creator of the framework, he answers, is the two French guys. They will answer, say, yeah, sure, that's a good idea. We'll implement that for the next version. So that's really cool. Maybe we should ask. So that's it, really. And now we get access to the injected variables. So what is the story with the middleware? A little bit similar. Oh no, I forgot to change the markup, but it's basically the same story. You create a middleware in the middlewares folder, and then you register it in the Nuxt config, and then you use it in your component like this. So there are different, maybe just ignore this markup and let's look at the text instead. Middlewares are functions that are run between navigations. They receive the context object, a little bit of a typo here. They receive the context object, which is really good. As we've seen, we get access to a lot of interesting variables. Router middlewares are executed between each navigation, like our analytics middleware that we'll take a look at. Named middleware are executed before entering specified pages, like this page. See, I specified the name auth router guard, so that's called a named middleware. Anonymous middlewares are inline. Say I, instead of writing a name of a middleware, I just write inline the middleware. I don't know why that doesn't seem like a nice approach to me, but it's doable. Server middlewares are passed the arguments request, response, and next. And this is probably the most advanced topic that we'll be looking at today, if we have time. So this is an example of a named middleware. And if you want to make a router middleware, you go and you configure the router object in the Nuxt config, and you say that the middleware is this array. So let's take a look at these middlewares. Middleware folder. Analytics, we'll take a look at this one first because it's really simple. Again, this code is just to show you what you have access to. The middleware is going to be run on the server if it's an initial request. Otherwise, it's going to be run inside the client. And I've commented this code out because I didn't want all the spam in the console. But now, as you can see, we're using the Axios instance here. And now you see Samuel Leberto. I didn't realize that at first. I think it's a friend of mine. Now we're using the post method instead. Instead of like we saw before with the Star Wars API, we were always using fetch, and it defaults to a get call. But now we want to make a post call to myanalytics.com. And we want to pass this object as the post body. It has the key of path and the value of route full path. So we can track how many times does this full path get hit. So we can do some analytics works. So that's the analytics middleware for us. And this one is called between each render. Client server renders and client renders. The next middleware is the auth route guard. And now we can see I'm not extracting all the variables. I'm just extracting the ones that I need for this middleware. we're looking at the context, we're looking at the store, we want to use the error function. If the store doesn't have an auth user, so null equals to false here, if we hit the logout button, we will change the variable to null, and this will become false. So if we don't have a user, we will call the error function with this input, and that's what we saw before. If this obviously if this statement doesn't come true, the life cycle just goes on. So let's have another quick look at the see that we've logged out for some reason, and we can see that plugin middleware has sent us to this page. 37, pretty good on time here, I think. So the modules, let's have a look at, because we have a bit of time now to look at some of the more advanced stuff. As you can, if you're a keen observer, you will realize that this route guard is going to malfunction. It's going to, obviously, it can never have, on the server side, it can never have access to your store. Well, it can, but only if you do what I'm going to show you. If you just keep, whenever you log in, say you make, let's open the store now, actually, because we need to see that. Whenever we log in, we dispatch this action here, the login action, and these actions get passed with the Vuex context. That's why I named it the Vuex context. It's not the same as the Nuxt context. Vuex actions get past the Vuex context and your argument. So the Vuex context has a function called commit, is how you call these mutations, and this is a step where you actually write in the state. So in the login action, we use this.axios.post. See now the Axios module that I have installed, that I got from the community, I've installed it globally. It takes it's just one command. You just use the Nuxt add command, if I remember it correctly. So we get access to it here. Global variables, see it's not imported at the top here. And we use the post method again. And now we're getting to the cool stuff here. Now we're calling /API/logins, and we're passing the credentials. After we get the response, we get some data, and then we commit set user to that data. So server middleware is used to create to really utilize the Node.js server and make it run your code. Obviously, the server-side rendering, you don't have to deal with that at all. It's just going to happen automatically out of the box. You can configure it if you want to. But we have created here a little REST API, if you like. So this is going to be familiar to you if you are a backend programmer, if you make REST APIs and stuff. Looks pretty much like any Java backend, for instance. We have a router here as well. And again, just to be clear, this code is executed on the Node.js server. When we have the path is /API, and so when anyone goes to, that's the root path, the base path /API. If there's a post request to /login, so we're not making a post request here. We're accepting. We're answering any post request to /API/login. We're going to answer it with. We're going to handle it with this function here. And right now it's inline. That function is getting past the request and the response objects. And we look at the request body username field, if it's demo, and the request body password is demo, we will set the request session, the session object, and this is essentially a cookie object, and we're adding an auth user key to that cookie, and we're setting the value to this user. This is the user object. It could have a phone number, email, address, and whatever. And obviously, what we would do in this layer in a real application, we would call another database server that has all our users in a table. But with this functionality, we can make an API gateway, and we can hide the calls to the real server. So the user couldn't use his browser tools and find out where our actual database server is located on which URL. Heading back to this code here, that's the state function. This is what you're gonna see a lot of the time in a Vue application. You have something like this, and then you call something. Only sometimes you could call the real database server here if you wanted to, but this is just a cool feature that I like to try out. And we get the response, and we set it to our state. So that would be enough. This part would be enough if we were to just navigate locally. But say you're logged in, logging in again, demo, login. See, now we're logged in. Because the first rendering takes place on the server, if I didn't use that request session code that I showed you, if I were to hit enter now, I would be unauthorized. But now, with the help of a Nuxt plugin provided by the Nuxt community, it's all set up for me by using that context object. So that's pretty cool. That's something that we could use at work in my team, because we're doing this whole we're solving this issue in another way today. So it's interesting. We're gonna take a look at that. And I think that's about it. We have another minute. Let's talk about the community. So I'll make that a little bit bigger for you. There are some useful links here. Vue.js.org for Vue. Vuex, if you want to learn more about the State Manager plugin, it's something that is very central to both a Vue and a Nuxt application. Although with Vue 3, it may get replaced by the composition API. Vuetify.js is the framework that I used to make all of these cool graphics elements. It is one of the best libraries, I think. I'm gonna close that again. I just wanted to show you what it looked like. Vueschool.io has a lot of courses. Vue Mastery has a lot of courses where you can look and get in touch with the community. Nuxt.js.org is obviously the main website for Nuxt. Mastering Nuxt is a school for Nuxt. And this is the repository for Nuxt. It's really cool. I'm going to show you something. They have an examples folder where you can see a lot of cool examples of how you can use all this in the best possible way. See, they have an I internationalization examples and middleware examples and nested routes examples and no server-side rendering. Maybe you don't want the server-side rendering, so you can turn that off. They have a good example for that here. My code for this project is available here at GitHub Ringo Arena /Nuxt demo, and we will send these links to you in an email this afternoon or tomorrow. Any more questions? Was that a lot to take in? People have fallen asleep, I think. Well, I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope that if you need to decide on a framework for your next front-end project, I hope that you will take Nuxt.js into consideration. Thank you.